Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Our lead story tonight is about India's economy. It's making headlines every day with positive projections from various international agencies. The latest one comes from S&P Global. It says India will be a $6.7 trillion economy by the end of this decade. Earlier, Morgan Stanley upgraded India to an overweight economy. What does it mean? What should you make of these projections and what are the potential challenges? We'll discuss all of this and more. Meanwhile, Russia is running out of military recruits at home, so it is looking at Kazakhstan as a potential hunting ground. A new ad promises a hefty joining bonus from the Russian military. Meanwhile, in China, people are angry, cities are flooded, the government has passed new orders. They say forget the people, save the projects first. And the top leadership is holidaying in a seaside town. In Bangladesh, political violence is on the rise ahead of elections. In South Korea, a heat wave is making the government scramble. Will the coup in Niger lead to blackouts in France? And why young people are adopting stuffed toys as babies? That's up ahead. The headlines first. 2 US Navy sailors have been arrested, charged with spying for China. If convicted, these 2 sailors face up to 20 years in jail. Beijing denies any knowledge of the alleged activity and accuses Washington of running a smear campaign. India will attend the Ukraine peace talks. Saudi Arabia is hosting the meeting in Jeddah this weekend. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval will represent India. Ukraine, the United States, China, Brazil and many European countries have been invited, but there's no invite for Russia. In India, relief for opposition leader Rahul Gandhi. The Supreme Court of the country stays the Congress leader's defamation conviction. This paves the way for Rahul Gandhi to return to Parliament. He will also be able to contest national elections due next year. He was convicted earlier this year for mocking Prime Minister Modi's surname in 2019. Ethiopia declares a state of emergency. This comes amid clashes in the Amhara region between the military and local militants. Fighting broke out earlier this week. Amhara is Ethiopia's second most populous region. Andrew Tate has been released from house arrest in Romania. The controversial influencer was in detention for more than 7 months. He faces charges of rape and human trafficking. He has to remain in the country and cannot reach out to witnesses and victims. And some good news for Justin Trudeau. Taylor Swift has added Canada tour dates. After the Prime Minister's appeal, Swift will perform 6 shows in Toronto next year as part of her Eras tour. Last month, Trudeau had urged the pop star to not skip Canada. Money talks. The louder it talks, the more people listen. This is true for individuals, companies and countries. Bigger economy equals more influence, which is why we are obsessed with GDP. That's gross domestic product. It's a sum total of everything we produce in a country. The US tops this list. Their GDP is around $26 trillion. China is second with $18 trillion. And India is at number 5 at $3.7 trillion. But maybe not for long. A new report by Standard & Poor's says India's GDP could double in the next 7 years. By 2031, it could be $6.7 trillion. How can we achieve this? What are the challenges and what more should be done? To achieve this, we need consistently high growth rate. How much? Around 6.7% every year. That's the growth rate we need. If we grow at this rate for 7 years, we will hit $6.7 trillion. On paper, this is achievable. India's growth rate in the last fiscal was 7.2%. And this year? Well, this year things could be a little more difficult. The same report is projecting India's growth at 6% this year, which is quite good if you look at the rest of the world. But 6% is not as much as last year. And why is that? A, because the global economy is slowing down, and B, India's interest rates are higher now. The Reserve Bank of India kept increasing interest rates until April this year. These hikes have a delayed effect. You will see that effect in the current financial year. But coming back to the GDP report, what is the quality of this growth? Is it just the rich who are getting richer? Well, the per capita GDP right now is $2,600. By 2031, it is projected to hit 4,500. So basically double. And these numbers are good. What is driving them? According to this report, a couple of things. One is the investments from government and private sector. Second is the reform effect. India has implemented some key reforms in the last few years, like the goods and services tax or GST. It's not a perfect system right now, but hopefully by 2031, all the issues will be ironed out. So we've talked about the desired growth rate. We've also mentioned the strengths. But what are the challenges? Well, this report mentions three of them. One is labor participation, just a fancy word for jobs really. We need to put more and more people into the workforce. If not, we will have jobless growth. In 2008, India's unemployment was around 5.3%, and now it's 8%, around 8%. Now, this level is much less compared to the pandemic levels, but it's still too high. In the G7, for example, unemployment is 4%. Another labor issue is the participation of women. You can't grow without employing more women. It's like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Unfortunately, India is doing just that. Only 29% of women between 15 and 59 years of age are working in India. Among men, this number is 80%. We need to improve this urgently. Challenge number two is private investment in manufacturing. All your factories and production houses. India's GDP is still dominated by the service sector, things like software, consulting, call centers. They make up more than 50% of it. And manufacturing, just about 25%. Now, economists say this is not enough because factories are the bedrock of any development plan. They create more jobs. There is more value addition. Plus, they support other sectors. So, India needs more factories. And finally, challenge number three, competitiveness. Simply producing stuff is not enough. These products must be competitive. There is a reason why German cars are considered the gold standard, or Swiss watches. There is also a reason why people laugh at made in China. So, you need both quality and quantity. How do you get that? By investing in human resources, by attracting more foreign investment and knowledge. Does India have the ingredients to overcome these roadblocks? Brokerage firm Morgan Stanley thinks so. They have upgraded India's outlook from equal weight to overweight. I know it sounds like fat shaming, but in this case, it's actually praise. The same report has also downgraded China. It was overweight before, now it is equal weight. What do these tags mean? Normally, they're used to evaluate stocks. An overweight stock is expected to do well. Its fundamentals are good, the trajectory is good, so overweight stocks should outperform the market. It's a good bet basically. Underweight is the exact opposite. These stocks will perform worse than the market or the benchmark indices. And equal weight? Well, so. They will remain in line with the benchmark. So here's what Morgan Stanley is saying. India will outperform the global economy. China will stay on par with it. They build India as the number one pick among emerging markets, which is great news, right? It is. But let's not celebrate too early. These are all projections. They're done based on numbers and assumptions. The real world does not work like that. You could have a pandemic in between. There could be a war. There could be political instability. All of these factors contribute to economic growth, and that is India's biggest challenge, consistency. We've seen periods of high growth before, but sustaining that is key. It's good that the world sees India as a bright spot. It means more investments. But how we use those investments is equally important. Because in a country of 1.4 billion people, growth is inevitable. What we need is quality growth. More women in the labor force, more skilled jobs for the youth, a narrowing wealth gap and cheaper healthcare. That's what we need. India has the perfect opportunity to build all of this. It's all about seizing the moment. We just told you about the Indian economy. The Russian economy is booming too. In fact, contrary to expectations, the war has failed to dent growth. New numbers are out. In the month of June, Russia grew at 5.3%. This is on a year-on-year basis. Clearly, Western sanctions have not had the kind of impact they expected. The hope was that sanctions would put pressure on Russia and force Vladimir Putin to end the war. They've achieved the very opposite. Putin is doubling down. Russian forces are hiring more soldiers. Not just at home, they're scouting for talent in Kazakhstan too. That is their new recruitment ground. Moscow has released an online ad. In fact, multiple ads. They feature Russian and Kazakh flags and a slogan which says, "Shoulder to shoulder." The ad makes an attractive offer to Kazakh citizens. Sign up to fight for the Russian forces and get a joining bonus of 495,000 rubles. How much money is that? Some 5,200 US dollars. That's the joining bonus they're offering. And what is the salary? At least 190,000 rubles or some 2,000 US dollars, plus some perks which they've not spelled out. Next question. Where will these new recruits go? The ad does not mention Ukraine. It says the potential recruits will join the Russian army in the Far East, specifically the Sakhalin region. Why is Russia recruiting from Kazakhstan though? Because they're running out of recruits at home. So they're casting a wider net, and Kazakhstan, on paper at least, seems like a good fit. The country is a former Soviet republic. It is home to about 3.5 million ethnic Russians, plus Russia and Kazakhstan are allies. So there's a lot going for this, but there's a problem too. The Kazakh government does not support the war in Ukraine. Also, their law bans citizens from fighting abroad. But that's not stopping Moscow from trying. They're pulling out all stops now. Even coming up with a TV show, a daily show, 1 hour long, featuring the wives and mothers of Russian military recruits. They'll narrate their stories and tales of heroism. The idea is to encourage more people to sign up. There are recruitment billboards all over Russia. The target audience of these ads are taxi drivers, fitness instructors, and security guards. This ad encourages them to give up their jobs and quote unquote become a warrior instead. That's what they're asking people to do. There's a slogan too, "You're a man, so be one." That's what it says. And there are Hollywood-style recruitment videos. Take a look at this one. So ads like these have been doing the rounds. What have they achieved so far? By the month of June, 117,000 new recruits had signed up. This is after Putin mobilized 300,000 reservists, which happened last fall. It led to a mass exodus from Russia. Several thousand eligible recruits left the country, although it does not seem to have hit Russia's war plans. Their forces are still fighting. They're fighting with the same level of intensity. And now they're looking for more recruits. What does this tell you? That Russia plans to continue the fighting. Same is the case with Ukraine. Their forces are also recruiting in large numbers, but Zelensky is unhappy, not because he can't get the soldiers he wants to get. Zelensky is unhappy with the recruitment centers. They conducted an audit into these centers and they found rampant corruption. The full report is not out yet, but some stories have emerged. There was one case from Odessa. The head of the recruitment center is in detention now. He is accused of corruption and embezzlement. A trial is believed to be underway. Apparently, this official took a lot of money. How much? A little over $5 million. This was government money, but the official used it to enrich himself. Reports say he got a house in Spain and a Mercedes-Benz car, all in the name of his mother, apparently. And this is just one case. It's not clear how deep the rot is. Like I said, the full report is still awaited. President Zelensky has pledged to fix these recruitment centers now. He said that there are quote-unquote numerous abuses which he finds, and I'm quoting again, he finds them revolting, he says. But this is not the first time he's making these promises or such comments. Corruption has been a perennial problem in Ukraine. Zelensky has fired dozens of officials during the course of this war. Some were even part of his inner circle. He fired them. But this has failed to fix the problem. So this is what we have. A conflict that is stretching far longer than expected. And both Russia and Ukraine grappling with their limitations. And speaking of limitations, it's not a word in the Chinese president's dictionary. Xi Jinping is called the chairman of everything because he controls everything in China, from the government to the Communist Party and the military. Xi Jinping has the power, all the power, without accountability. And now it's hurting the people of China. In fact, people in China have seen a lot of devastation in recent days. Large parts of the country were flooded. This was triggered by heavy rains, the heaviest rainfall, in fact, that China has seen in 140 years. More than a dozen people are dead. Several more are missing. Tens of thousands have been evacuated. Usually, that's what you expect when flood waters enter people's homes. But a different story is playing out in northern China, in the Hebei province. Here, the Communist Party has issued different orders. They said, instead of saving the people, first save the projects, the president's projects, save them first. Officials were mobilized to secure these projects. And who issued these orders? Well, they came from the very top. Ni Yufeng is the Communist Party boss for this province of Hebei. He released a statement. Some cities of Hebei share a border with Beijing. Ni's statement was a message for them. It said, and I quote, "Border cities must resolutely play a good role of moat for the capital." Basically, Ni is saying, drown if you have to, but save Beijing. His strategy is inspired from the medieval era when castles needed protection. They would make a ditch around them and fill it up with water. This is what you call a moat. It acted as the first line of defense for the castle in the event of an attack. Now, China is replicating the same concept to keep Beijing safe. That's how bad the flood situation is. And Ni's statement is only making it worse for the people. After suggesting the moat defense, he gives more instructions. He wants a specific city to be kept out of this moat defense. This is the Shaoshen area. It's about 100 kilometers away from Beijing. It was an important project for Xi Jinping. China started building the city in the year 2017 and the president gave it a lot of importance. In the past, he said that this project is of quote-unquote millennial significance. So it's very close to the president's heart. And Ni's job is to protect it. He said, and I'm quoting again, "This is the top priority of flood control in our province." So the instructions are quite clear. Save Shaoshen at any cost. The rest is expendable. This message went out far and wide. It reached the masses too, and they're furious. They expressed their anger on Weibo. Weibo is China's Twitter-like platform. I have some comments with me. This is what the people have been saying, and I'm quoting. "This official only wants a promotion. He doesn't care whether people live or die." Another one says, "You want to protect Beijing, Tianjin, Shenzhen, and Daxing Airport. Then we Hebei people don't need you. Get out of Hebei." This is what people are saying. Many more have called for this man's resignation, but it seems his moat plan is being implemented. The province of Hebei is flooded. More than 1 million people have been relocated. At least 9 people are dead, but that's an undercount. Several people are reported missing. They were probably swept away by the flood water, so the death toll will rise whether or not China declares it. They have a reputation of managing data. But there's no denying that the crisis is grave. Experts say the flood waters may take months to recede. Where is the Chinese leadership? On vacation. Not making this up. The Chinese government is on a break. They've started their annual vacation. The top leaders are in the seaside town of Beidehi. They go there every year. It's an annual ritual and an old tradition. And for some reason, they keep this holiday a secret. There are no photographs, no dates are announced. So how does the world come to know? Every year, observers look for signs. They look for patterns of behavior. That's how they figure out if the leaders are on vacation. And this time, a meeting by Xi Jinping's chief of staff gave it away. He met with 57 tech experts in the very same town, Beidehi, and so it can be assumed that the rest of the Chinese leadership is also present there. What do they do in this town every year? It is believed that they meet in a relaxed setting. They share concerns with the current leadership. In the past, such meetings used to be a frank exchange of opinion. Even dissent was allowed. But that may not be the case anymore. Xi Jinping does not like hearing complaints. Reports say the scope for party elders to speak their minds has shrunk in China, and that becomes obvious when you consider some recent events. A few weeks back, Xi Jinping fired his foreign minister. We told you about that. Qin Gang disappeared more than a month ago. No one has seen him since.
I firmly believe
Some reports say he was punished for having an affair. Others say he's been purged. There is no official version of what happened. Also missing are some top generals of the Chinese army, 2 former heads of China's rocket force. Xi Jinping replaced them without notice, and the generals are nowhere to be seen. Will the president address these departures in Beidaihe? Honestly, we don't know. Even if he does, it may not come out. So this is China's story. Hebei is submerged and Chinese leaders have disappeared. But then again, this is not a first. Xi Jinping did the very same thing in 2020 when a virus was killing people in China. Their president disappeared. Now floods are causing havoc and he's abandoned his people again. There's bad news for Apple. Their flagship gadgets are not flying off the shelves like the iPhone or the iPad. We look at the numbers first, then the reasons. Apple has published its revenue report for the first quarter. That's April, May and June. That's the first quarter. iPhone sales were down 2%, iPad sales almost 20%, and the MacBook down 7%. Only one hardware category did well, and that's wearables. Revenue from AirPods and watches was up 2%. Overall, Apple clocked around $81.8 billion in sales. That's around 1% less than last year. And don't think these numbers are an anomaly. They're not. This is Apple's third straight quarter of declining sales. So what is happening? Is Apple losing its charm, or have people shifted to new brands? Well, a bit of both. This quarter is usually slow for Apple. They release their new devices in the month of September, so people wait. They delay their purchase until the new model comes out. But that alone does not explain the dip. Let's go back in history to the 2000s. Apple was synonymous with innovation. They made touchscreens better. They gave us great cameras. Basically, they gave us a template for smartphones. Every device you see today is inspired from that first iPhone. So what changed? Well, looks like Apple stopped innovating. Take the latest iPhone model, the 14. How is it different from the one before? Apple says it is something called the dynamic island, a little bubble on top that lets you multitask. But hundreds of dollars for that bubble? It barely counts as innovation. I bet most iPhone 14 users don't even use it. And don't get me wrong, new models have become faster and more slick. If you look at the specification chart, you'll understand. But does that help the average user? Maybe the website loads a nanosecond faster, or the pixels are more defined. These are things you can barely notice, things that don't make your life any easier. But compare this to the iPhone's older innovations. Multi-touch interface, you can pinch and zoom thanks to that. Or the integrated music player, or the mobile YouTube app. These things change the way we use phones. So why aren't the new iPhones doing all of that? Have they reached the pinnacle of innovation? It's a dangerous assumption to make, because we are basically then saying that Apple has made the perfect phone and there is no room for improvement. So here's a better way to put it. Apple cannot seem to find ways to innovate, and it's not like they're not trying. Apple's research and development budget increased 84% from 2018 to 2022, 84%. They spent around $100 billion on innovation, yet nothing iconic. Maybe they are looking at it the wrong way. If money was the answer, startups would never succeed. Only the big companies would make profits. You see, sometimes innovation does not take $100 billion. It can happen in your parents' garage. That's where most US tech giants were born. So lack of innovation is one problem. The second is evolving customer base. People are more mature now. You can't sell them multitasking bubbles for hundreds of dollars. They need more. And guess who's offering that? Android alternatives. You have phones that flip and fold, phones that have transparent backs. Yes, they're gimmicks, but at least it's not the same old iPhone design. Apple realizes this problem. They're solving it in two ways. One is by diversifying. Apple now owns a streaming service. They're broadcasting sporting events. They're also making movies. In fact, services is the new money maker. Apple subscriptions topped 1 billion users in the last quarter. We're talking about things like Apple TV and iCloud. Revenue from services reached $21 billion, which is an 8% rise. So iPhone sales are down 2%, but Apple services are up 8%. It tells a story, doesn't it? The second strategy is to target new markets. People in the West do not see Apple as some aspirational product, but elsewhere they do. Apple's revenue in China was up almost 8%. In India, they set a new record for iPhone sales. They haven't said how many, but it's a record, we are told. Why do you think Apple has started a store in Mumbai and in Delhi? Because the company needs new buyers. Around 500 million Indians are in the middle class, another 700 million in China. Apple wants these people to buy iPhones, and we are not the ones saying this. The company's CEO Tim Cook has said this himself. Let me quote, "What I do see in India is a lot of people entering the middle class, and I'm hopeful that we can convince some number of them to buy an iPhone, and we'll see how that works out." Nothing surprising there. Most companies have a fixed strategy to grow, innovate, diversify or expand. That's their strategy, but Apple seems unable to do the first. So they're doing the second and the third. We've seen companies perish due to lack of innovation, like Nokia or Motorola. Apple is certainly being more smart about it, but will the strategy work? It could be years or decades before we have the answer. And speaking of innovation, there is talk of a major invention in the world of semiconductors. Let me underline the word major. Some are calling it the Holy Grail of chips, a superconductor. So what exactly is the buzz all about? Time for a quick science lesson. In the past, we've told you what a semiconductor is. It's a material through which you can pass electricity. You can regulate the flow, meaning electricity will pass in some conditions, but it won't otherwise. Now, this property makes them crucial to make electronics. Cars, mobiles, headphones, weapons, all of them have semiconductors inside, what we call chips. But this flow of electricity is not absolute. There is some resistance. And that's where superconductors are different. They allow electricity to pass with zero resistance. Let's try an example. Imagine you're driving on a straight highway. Your car is the electricity, the highway is the conductor. Now imagine there are traffic signals in between. Naturally, you would have to stop. So you would be slower and you would lose fuel and time. That's what a semiconductor is like. With superconductors, there are no traffic signals. It's pedal to the metal. You save time and fuel. Scientists in South Korea claim to have created such a substance, a superconductor. They're calling it LK99. You make it by introducing copper atoms to a mineral called lead apatite. 2 studies have been published so far. The initial one has 3 authors, the second one has 6. Other labs in the US and China are already testing it out. They're seeing if the claim checks out. We'll get to that in a bit. But first, what are the real world applications of a superconductor? How can we use them? Again, let's use 2 examples. We've all seen how power grids work. They transfer electricity using semiconductors, which means resistance. And this resistance results in some power being wasted, distribution loss. No such problem with superconductors. You won't lose power while transferring it. Imagine how much electricity we would save. Another example is gadgets. Computing time is proportional to the speed of electricity. The faster you can conduct, the faster the results. Again, superconductors can help. They could make your computers and phones much faster. So why haven't we made them before? Well, superconductors do exist. We use them in MRI machines and medical imaging. But all of them have one problem. They need extremely low or extremely high temperatures to work. One example is cuprate. It's a superconductor, but it can only work at minus 135 degrees Celsius. Your colleague at office cannot handle 38 degrees. Good luck with minus 135. My point is, it's not possible. You need superconductors that work at room temperature, which is why LK99 is so important. The Korean scientists say it does work at room temperature. Do others agree? 3 labs in China have managed to create LK99 and they're reporting different results, all 3 of them. One of them showed LK99 levitating over a magnet. Only superconductors do that, they levitate. Other materials spin like a compass. I guess that's a plus point. The second lab did not observe zero resistance. The third lab did, but at minus 163 degrees Celsius. So that's a no-go. The fact is we need to study this material more. Even if it is a superconductor, that's just half the job done. You need to figure out a lot more, like how much electricity can it conduct, how do you mass produce it, how do you embed these things in devices. So we have a long way to go, it's a long shot still. But there is good news and bad news here. The bad news is that such superconductor claims are not new. Most of them end up disappointing. It's so common that there's a word for it. They call it USO, Unidentified Superconductor Object. The good news is there is nothing unnatural about it. The laws of physics support the idea of a superconductor. They can be made. It's all about stumbling on the right material. Even if LK99 is not that holy grail, it is still valuable. Each failed invention gives a lot of information that could help us build a working superconductor. And now let's turn our attention to the West African nation of Niger. The coup leaders are still in power, for now at least. They've been issued an ultimatum by a bloc of West African countries. These countries have said that Niger's military junta must restore the presidency of the ousted leader, Mohamed Bazoum. Either that or risk a military intervention. These countries will intervene militarily. That's what they've said. The deadline they've set is of Sunday. But it seems that the junta has no intention of stepping down. They're already issuing decrees and scrapping decade-old agreements. The target of their ire seems to be France. France once colonized Niger. There's been an outpouring of anger against France recently. Supporters of the coup have blamed France for the poor conditions in their country. And it's likely that the junta will continue to paint Paris as the villain, which throws up the question, what happens to France's interests in this country, in Niger, especially its supply of uranium to power its nuclear reactors? You see, France relies on nuclear power for 70% of its electricity production, and Niger is one of its biggest suppliers of this nuclear fuel. So will the coup in Niger lead to blackouts in France? Here's a report.
Last week, a coup took place in the West African nation of Niger. And it does have its supporters. Hundreds of them have been taking to the streets of the capital, Niamey. Ask them why they support the coup, and you'll find a common theme in their answers.
The world must understand that Africa's misfortune is France, the authorities, because the French are citizens like us, so we can't hate them. But we hate their authorities because they've done too much harm to our country, and really, enough is enough.
We have uranium, we have diamonds, we have gold, we have oil, and we live like slaves. Why should we? Until when? We can't accept it. The French base in Niger must leave. We don't need the French to keep us safe.
There have been attacks on the French embassy in Niger's capital. The French troops stationed in Niger are being asked to go home. And supporters of the coup have been vocally opposing France. The military junta has also been ramping up the anti-French rhetoric.
In view of France's casual attitude and reaction to the internal situation prevailing in our country, the National Council for Safeguarding the Homeland has decided to denounce France's security and defense cooperation agreements.
5 military deals have been revoked. These deals were signed decades ago, between 1977 and 2020. So, to revoke them clearly sends a message that Niger's new junta considers France the enemy. And that could be a good strategy to get public support. France and Niger share a troubled history. Niger was a French colony till 1960. So were a lot of other West African nations. Mauritania, Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Benin. All these nations were part of what was once called French West Africa. And no matter what tone-deaf justifications the former colonizers give, colonization always leads to the exploitation of the colonies. There's a reason Niger was one of the poorest nations in the world even before the coup. This is a country rich in natural resources, uranium, gold and oil, like one of the demonstrators mentioned earlier. But it was still considered one of the poorest nations in the world, because it has been in a situation that most former colonies face, an unequal power dynamic with its former colonizer. Some critics call it neo-colonization. Raw materials like uranium from Niger go to a former colonizer like France. It is used to fuel French nuclear power plants. The French energy sector benefits, sells its electricity abroad, generates billions, and then gives some of the money back to Niger as aid. This isn't a hypothetical scenario, this actually happens. France generates around $3.3 billion a year selling electricity. Meanwhile, Niger, which supplies about 18% of France's and 5% of the world's uranium, remains poor. You can imagine that it would frustrate the people there. Niger's uranium is just one example. There are other resources and raw materials in all the former colonies that continue to get exploited. And it could explain the anti-French sentiment in the other coup-hit nations in the region, like Mali and Burkina Faso. It's an existing wound, a festering injustice, and military juntas can easily tap into this negative sentiment to become popular among the people. But then what? If Niger stops sending uranium to France and Europe, the colonizers will still survive.
Economic and trade relations between Niger and France are extremely tenuous. Of course, people always think of uranium when they talk about Niger, but over the last 10 years, it appears that Niger is France's fifth largest supplier of uranium. So it is no longer the strategic partner for uranium that it may have been in the 60s, 70s and the 80s.
EU utilities have sufficient inventories of natural uranium to mitigate any short-term supply risks, and for the medium and long term there are enough deposits on the world market to cover the EU needs. That is something that we have ascertained.
Finding new partners takes time that the fragile West African economies may not have. And the military junta isn't likely to have the best economic minds available. So Niger needs to think carefully. Is it worth risking a complete collapse just to vent against its former colonizer? And France needs to do better as well. Whatever outreach Macron has undertaken through the years has clearly failed to sway Niger. France needs to acknowledge its failures in West Africa, and it needs to become an equal partner to its former colonies.
And now to Bangladesh. It is going to polls in 6 months, but the violence is already boiling over. Last week, its capital Dhaka witnessed clashes. On one side, there was the opposition. They want elections under a caretaker government. Tens of thousands of them took to the streets. They demanded Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's resignation. On the other side were supporters of the ruling party. They called it a peace rally, but things in Dhaka were barely peaceful. Anti-government protesters blocked roads. Police fired rubber bullets and tear gas. There were clashes with pro-government marchers. Stones were pelted, vehicles were torched, and hundreds got injured.
The country cannot be run in the way this autocratic government is running it. That's why we came here to take back our voting rights. It has been a while since I voted as a citizen.
As we're in power, we are the sentinels of the general public's safety and security. That is why we took a position on the streets today by order of the Prime Minister. Therefore, nobody can play with people's lives and fire.
In Bangladesh, violence ahead of elections is not new. But this time, the opposition is up in arms. They want a caretaker government to conduct the election. To understand why, let's look at Bangladesh's history. From 1991 to 2006, only two leaders ruled Bangladesh alternately. It was either Sheikh Hasina of the Awami League or Khaleda Zia of the Bangladesh National Party, BNP. No government has won successive terms or had won successive terms in Bangladesh. That's because of a system of neutral caretakers. Basically, when an elected government completes 5 years in power, an interim government takes over. It controls state institutions for 3 months and then elections are held. This is done to prevent electoral manipulation, to keep elections free and fair. In 2008, Sheikh Hasina came to power. And a few years later, she scrapped the caretaker system. This was in the year 2011. They called the provision unconstitutional. They scrapped it. And since then, Sheikh Hasina's party has won 2 more elections, in 2014 and then again in 2018. But they were marred by boycotts and allegations of rigging. The West called it manipulated, and they're doing the same this time.
We are concerned about the reports of intimidation and political violence in Bangladesh surrounding this weekend's political protests. We encourage the government of Bangladesh to investigate reports of violence thoroughly, transparently, and impartially, and to hold the perpetrators of violence to account.
The US has announced visa curbs for those who undermine the vote. The EU too is mulling restrictions. The Hasina government says the polls will be free and fair. The opposition is not convinced though, especially the BNP. It's a party, like we said, led by former Prime Minister Khalida Zia. In 2018, Zia was charged with corruption. She got a 10-year prison term, but she's currently living at her residence in Dhaka due to health concerns. Her absence has led to a power vacuum in the BNP, her party. After she was jailed, her son, Tariq Rahman, became the party's acting chief. But now he's living in exile in the UK. He too has legal troubles. He's been sentenced to 9 years in jail. So that leaves the party's Secretary General, a man called Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir. He may not be a crowd puller like Khalida Zia, but he is the party's only face on the ground right now, and he is the one leading the anti-government protests. They say they will boycott the election if it is held under Sheikh Hasina. The fact is, even if they do contest, their chances do not look very good, which brings us to the question, will the election in Bangladesh be free and fair? The government says yes, the West says no. What about India? Well, unlike the West, India is not commenting. Bangladesh is India's friend and neighbor. Also, New Delhi does not believe in weighing in on the internal matters of others. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out. And now let's talk about the weather in South Korea. The country is going through a heat wave. Temperatures have hit 38 degrees Celsius in some parts, which is not very much if you're watching us from India. But in South Korea, it has led to this. There are a lot of children in Korea for an event. The World Scout Jamboree, that's the event. Now, some of you may know about Scouts and Guides. It's an institution that helps young people learn outdoor survival skills. And about 40,000 Scouts from around the world have gathered in South Korea, but the heat has played spoilsport. Hundreds of these Scouts and Guides in their teens have suffered from heat-related ailments. And the government of South Korea is ramping up efforts to address the issue. They're pulling out all the stops, both to save face and to save the event. Here's a report.
South Korea is hosting an event right now, the World Scout Jamboree. It's a gathering of scouts and guides from around the world, the first one since the pandemic. And South Korea is hosting the event with great fanfare. The country's president Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Hyun-hee were at the opening ceremony.
Please give them a big round of applause again.
Yoon even gave a speech during the event. The event was quite high profile. Celebrity adventurer Bear Grylls was also present.
What a sight!
And they all kicked off the 12-day camp. South Korea's Minister of Gender Equality and Family is a co-head of the organizing committee. You can tell that Seoul wanted the event to be a grand success. But it seems they didn't expect one thing to dampen spirits: the heat. South Korea has been going through an intense heat wave. Parts of the country are sweltering under 38 degrees Celsius heat. Seoul has issued its highest heat warning. But it seems the country didn't take enough precautions for the World Scout Jamboree. About 600 of the participants, mostly children between the ages of 14 and 18, have suffered heat exhaustion. Many have even had to go to the hospital near the camp. Others have been forced to rest, sometimes with IV drips to ensure they're safe. Hundreds of rescue personnel have been deployed at the event. And South Korea's government is keeping a close eye on the situation.
Regarding medical matters, the total number of outpatient visits yesterday was 1,486. Among them, 383 people were bitten by insects, accounting for 26.1%. 250 people had skin rashes and 138 people experienced heat-related symptoms, among others.
South Korea wants the event to go off smoothly, so much so that the president has personally been involved in fixing the situation.
The recent decree from the President of Korea gives Minister Kim increased ability and resources to provide water, shade, umbrellas, cooling buses, doctors and nurses to the site immediately.
Now, our viewers from India and other tropical countries may not understand what all the fuss is about. After all, 38 degrees Celsius may seem like a normal day. But that's not the case in most other parts of the world. What we consider hot is relative to what we're used to, and so many people around the world are not prepared to face this sort of heat. South Korea is definitely one example of a country not prepared for temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius. 16 people have already died there due to the ongoing heat wave. This is according to government data. Construction workers in the capital Seoul are protesting. They're demanding protections against the heat.
South Korea's heat wave is reaching a peak. Even though temperatures are exceeding 35 degrees, there is no rest for construction workers. It is becoming hard to even use the restrooms. We are holding this news conference calling for legislation since we are having problems on the lack of basic facilities.
Thermal cameras have been depicting the heat in Seoul. The city's monuments are a bright red. They're burning up. And this is definitely taking a toll on people.
When I first started farming, there were no sudden and unexpected downpours. Global warming didn't progress that much at that time, so it was not that hot either. However, it's getting warmer and sudden rainstorms are happening a lot more. It's out of our individual abilities.
I was worried about heavy rains, but after the rains, the weather is extremely hot now. I'm exhausted. I've lost hope in farming.
Farmers are among the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And some, like those farmers, are losing hope. We need to do our part to mitigate climate change. If not, then we may have a future where the heat stops children from even venturing into the great outdoors.
Gen Z has a new haiku. It's bizarre as usual, but also represents the new normal. Pets are the new kids. Plants are the new pets. And kids are the new exotic animals. If you have no words, brace yourself for what I'm about to tell you next. Chinese youngsters have taken this saying to the next level. Stuffed toys of exotic animals are their new kids. Apparently, parenting anything that lives and breathes is too much work. Well, it is, but this is beyond bizarre. Gen Z is adopting orangutan toys. And it's not monkeying around. Youngsters are bathing, clothing and feeding these toys. Even taking them on vacations and photoshopping ultrasound pictures with monkeys. Basically treating toys like their own children. I have no words. Here's a report.
Cute, right? At a glance, this is just any other orangutan stuffed toy made by the Swedish furniture giant IKEA. But don't be mistaken. This could soon become someone's child, thanks to an outlandish trend in China, where Gen Z has a monkey on its back, quite literally. 2023 is the year of the monkey in China, but now its youth is taking this to an obnoxious level, where people are adopting stuffed orangutan toys, then bathing, clothing and feeding these toys, taking them for car rides, reading them bedtime stories, carrying them on vacations, and even throwing them birthday parties. This started as an obscure subculture, with people buying these plushies from IKEA, treating them as kids, then posting about it. Then this trend got its own hashtag, as expected, like hashtag IKEA ape or hashtag IKEA gorilla, drawing tens of millions of views. And as the saying goes, monkey see, monkey do. Now, this niche trend is coming to the mainstream. So much so that these toys are flying off the racks. People are buying multiple pieces just so they can give their toy new siblings. And this monkey mania is getting weirder by the day. People are editing ultrasound pictures with creepy floating orangutans to pretend that they carried the toy in their wombs. Now, Photoshop is good, but it certainly won't make us believe that humans gave birth to a soft toy. Quite absurd. But Gen Z seems to be having more fun than a barrel of monkeys with this trend. Why? Because they'd rather adopt a fake baby or a stuffed toy than raise a real human one. The Chinese don't want to have children. It's become tough to raise children in China. The living costs are on the rise. So is the unemployment rate. While the birth rate is plummeting. China's population fell for the first time in 60 years. Last year, there were just 6.7 births per 1,000 people. That's the lowest birth rate on record. But it's not just about babies. The Chinese don't want to get married either. China's marriage rate has declined rapidly over the past decade. Last year, it was the lowest on record. The number of marriages dropped to about 7 million. What's the result? China has a crisis of companionship. Stuffed toys have long been known to satisfy that desire. 44% of adults worldwide have held on to their childhood toys. 34% of them sleep with a soft toy every night. So, owning soft toys is not the problem here. But raising them as children? That crosses the boundary over to creepy land. Have you ever watched the TV show Friends? Do you remember this episode, the one with the monkey? This is where Ross gets a pet monkey, Marcel. The two are inseparable. Ross adopts Marcel after his divorce, hoping that a pet would reduce his loneliness. It seems like Chinese youngsters have taken a page out of Ross's book and taken it a little too far. On the brighter side, if this trend lasts, Gen Z might just create an army of obedient children who never talk back. But for the sake of humanity, let's hope that it's all just monkey business.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We have more from China, where a car drives off a collapsed bridge on a highway and falls into a crater. No casualties were reported, thankfully. A red statue of Vladimir Putin pops up in a Roman playground. The effigy shows Putin sitting on top of a miniature war tank. Selfies claim yet another casualty. German tourists destroy a historic statue in Italy while posing for a photo. And finally, what makes August 4th significant? Let's go back to the year 1956 when Apsara became operational. Apsara is India's oldest nuclear research reactor and Asia's first. We're leaving you with these images. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Russian President